Good afternoon. My name is Lori McDaniel, and I am Iowa DNR's Water Quality Bureau Chief. Today, we're here to provide you with an overview of our 303D list, also called the Impaired Waters List, for the 2022 cycle. And today actually opens up our official public comment period for the report. I'd like to start by putting a little bit of context around Iowa's 303D list. The Clean Water Act lays out a path for us to follow in terms of setting goals for our waters, determining if the waters meet those goals, and if not, being able to prepare a plan to improve the water quality for those segments. In order to set our water quality goals for each segment of a river or stream, we apply the appropriate designated uses to each stream segment. Almost all of our stream segments will have more than one designated use. For example, we have designated uses for aquatic life, recreation, human health, and drinking water. Each of those designated uses have their own criteria that is applied to that segment. The next step is to monitor our waters to see if they are meeting all of our criteria for the assigned designated uses. And finally is the assessment of our data. Not only do we use our own monitoring data, we compile data from other monitoring efforts in Iowa. We are fortunate to have many data sources throughout the state. A list of water body segments that do not meet one or more of the assigned water quality criteria is then created. This is also known as the Impaired Waters List or the 303B list. It is important to note that all of the categories on the 303D list are required by EPA, except for the category called Waters in Need of Further Investigation. This category was created through Iowa Code to provide a mechanism to keep an eye on certain segments where we may not have enough information to provide a comprehensive assessment of that segment. As I mentioned earlier, we have completed the draft of our report, compiling all of the monitoring data and assessment of stream segments across the state. This is the time where we ask you, the public, to review that data that we used in our assessment. We encourage you to visit our ADB.net website, which we'll show it here in a minute, to review our draft report, data sources, and assessments. All public comments must be submitted through the email address that we specifically set up for this comment period. The email address is ircomment@dnr.iowa.gov or ircomment@dnr.iowa.gov. The public comment period is open now until March 19th. Once the public comment period closes, we review every comment that has been submitted and make revisions if appropriate. The final report is then prepared and submitted to EPA. And at that time, we'll make the final report also available to the public. The report will include a summary of all the public comments that we've received and a response to those comments. Our plan is to submit that final report to EPA in April of this year. I will now introduce Dan Kendall, and we'll take a moment to transition to our ADB.net presentation.
All right. Hi, my name is Dan Kendall. I'm an Environmental Specialist Senior in the Water Quality Monitoring Assessment section, and I'm one of the co-leads on our Integrated Report program. I've been with the program since 2016, and so we're going to go through the basic layout of our ADB.net or our assessment database that we use for assessing the water bodies, and for also will ultimately be what we use to submit data onto EPA. The first thing in here is going to be our materials for review. That's going to be both our 303D list along with the full integrated report, what's the 305B portion of it, and then our assessment methodology. The assessment methodology can be found on our publications page, which if you follow the link on the page here, you will get to that publications page where you'll see our assessment methodology. A little bit of a, beyond that, there's a little bit of a background here on the various types of support levels that go towards those support levels that go towards the various, gosh, I'm forgetting my words now. Yeah, sorry about that. Uses are the various categories that assess based on the various uses that we have, and those uses were mentioned by Lori earlier, that recreational use, aquatic life use, human health, and drinking water use. So we'll have, fully supported waters that are in need of further investigation, our category 4s, which are waters that are impaired that a TMDL is no longer needed. And then category 5, which are the ones that make it onto our impaired waters list. Those are impaired waters that are still in need of a TMDL. Up in our top right corner here is where we actually have all the various lists that are produced as a part of the 303D and 305B integrated report. There's one thing you'll notice, you'll see that we bounce between both uses and segments. Uses are the individual rec use or the individual uses that are assessed. Segments are the water bodies themselves that have multiple uses on them. So all segments will have at least 2 uses and up to 4. But all the lists are right behind, are selected in here. Oops, I did not want to hit that. For the various lists that are there. So we have our fully supporting uses. We have uses that are not assessed, water body segments that are not assessed. The WINOFI list can be found here. These are waters that may or may not be meeting the various criteria, but we think there might be an impairment. Category 4 are ones that have been impaired, but then a TMDL has been written for them, or in a few select cases, TMDLs were not required. The Category 5 integrated 303D list. The list of delistings for the current assessment cycle, these were ones that were on our previous 2020 Impaired Waters list and have now shown either improvement or had a TMDL written for them, or a couple other reasons that's for delisting. And then there's just basically all your assessments and then impaired waters. Down below, we have a breakdown of how the waters or segments fall. We have our lake and river segments, wetland segments. They're all broken down into categories that we consider healthy. Healthy are categories 1 and 2, where they're fully meeting their designated use, or 1 or more of their designated uses are meeting, but we do not have information for the rest. Then we have our WINOFI list, which are in yellow, and then our impaired, which include both the Category 4 and Category 5. The other thing we wanted to show you here before we get to the very bottom charts would be how to actually get to an assessment segment and what is actually shown. And for that, I'm just going to use an example of jumping into our Category 5 list and selecting a segment on here. When you select a segment, it will take you out into the actual assessment for the 2022 cycle. And these are Category 5, so there will be an impairment listed on these particular ones. If you select out of the list of any of the other lists, they may or may not have impairments on them. But what you'll find on these is you'll have the assessment cycle, you'll have the use support section, and this will have all the uses that this segment is designated for. This one actually has 3, 2 of which have assessments on them, and the third, where it says not assessed here, would be something that would fall into that use not assessed category that we have above, or have in the previous link. As you go down the list, there is a spot for impairment delistings. This particular segment doesn't have one, so that will be blank. In other segments, you will see what the delisting is and potentially what was the reason for delisting. Down in the documentation section, you have your assessment summary, which will have a brief narrative on what the causes of the impairment are, or if they're full support. And then below that, you will find all of the data in tabular form with the information on it. At the very bottom, you'll have assessment key dates and methods, and that's pretty much what you'll find on each assessment page. You can bounce out of that assessment page and into the segment page, which would be kind of one level up. From there, you can get to previous assessments. Has a little more details on the actual segment itself, what its designated uses are, and you'll notice that there's the 3 designated uses that you saw previously on the page before with the assessment. There may or may not be some segment notes. There's a map of its location, and then a link to any in-house, I should say, DNR data associated with that site, whether it be fish kill data, total, if there was a TMDL written, and then Aquia is our DNR database for housing water quality data. It will have links to the various sites on that page. And right now I'm going to bounce back out to the main assessment summary page. I believe as soon as we get there. That didn't work. It's chilly in here. Okay, I believe after that, I pass this off to Ken.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Creer. I'm an Environmental Specialist Senior in the Water Quality Monitoring and Assessment section. I've been with the IR program for about 20 years, the last 3 cycles serving as co-leader with Dan. I'm just going to pick up where he left off on this summary page. But first, I just want to mention that through the years, we've been striving more and more to make everything as transparent as we can. And so therefore, we are giving you not only the assessments, why we do it, the methodology, how we do it, and then in the assessments, we incorporate all the data and actually, much like high school, where we show our work on what we did for the assessments. So the second layer of these pie charts shows essentially, this is river and stream, this is, let me back up here, lakes and reservoirs, and these are wetlands. It just shows the amount of segments that were not assessed. So therefore, this yellow portion are those segments that where we had no data to do an assessment. These segments are the assessed segments where we had enough data to conduct a monitored assessment. And then these segments down here are those Minofi that comes up a lot, where there's a potential impairment. We did not have enough data to make a decision whether it goes to the Impaired Waters List. So as you can see, there's about 50% of our streams and rivers, lakes and reservoirs, and little wetlands where they're not assessed. But feel free to peruse those pie charts at your leisure. So let's get into some of the summary statistics based on the assessments that were completed for the 2022 IR cycle. This first one right here, summary statistics, category 5, Impaired Waters List. We ended up with 594 segments on the 303D list or Impaired Waters List. We'll get to this now. It's a slight increase over the 2020 cycle. And you have to remember, this isn't very intuitive, but every segment has one or more designated uses. And there can be one or more impairments per designated use. So realistically, you will always have more impaired uses or more total impairments than you will have impaired segments. let's go over to the right here, overall integrated report categories. Category 1, this is the high bar. This is where you have data for every designated use, and those data indicate full support of each use. And as you can see, the bar is very high. Out of all of the segments in Iowa, 15 are in Category 1. Category 2 is another full support category. What that means is at least one designated use is fully supported based on the data, and one or more are not assessed. Category 3, this is where a little bit of disconnect that Lori mentioned between DNR categories and EPA categories. What Category 3 means that there was insufficient data to assess that segment. The number that you see is 1530. However, when you click this little I box, our Category 3B, our WINOFI list, counts as not assessed in EPA's eyes. But Dan and I and the rest of the IR team, it takes the same amount of work to do the 3B or WINOFI assessments as it does for the rest of the assessments. And for this cycle, there were 295 WINOFI segments. So for our numbers, we had 1,235 segments that didn't have data, 295 that potentially impaired. However, in EPA's eyes, when we upload this report to their IR database called ATTAINS, their number will be 1,530 for Iowa segments not assessed. Category 4s, those are waters that are covered by a TMDL or another control source, or in certain situations, not very many, where a TMDL is not required because the impairment is not based on a pollutant. It's based on habitat or something else that is not considered a pollutant in the Clean Water Act. And Category 5 are those segments that have one or more impairments of a designated use. So this top line graph, I guess we'll call it, what this is, of all the impairments, total impairments in streams and rivers, here are the main causes. And we're just going to highlight that it's pretty obvious if you add indicator bacteria, biological, fish kill, and fish consumption, that constitutes the vast majority of impairments in Iowa streams and rivers. If we go immediate to the right, this is the same kind of graph, but details the lake, reservoir, and wetland segments. And in those, let me pause for a second. Dark blue is Category 5, light blue is Category 4. And they're additive for a total over here. But as you can see in the lakes, turbidity, algal growth, pH, and indicator bacteria. Those are the main drivers of the lake, reservoir, and wetland impairments in Iowa. We'll go back down. There were 81 fish kills during this cycle. And before I go into the causes of those, or the main causes, I want to interject just a little bit of information here. The report, the integrated report, has a negative bias. And I'm going to give you one reason, and there's many, but here's one. If there's a fish kill occurs on a segment, insufficient quantity and density, that segment will be impaired. But if no fish kill occurs on the segment, we don't call it fully supported. So it's the presence of data to indicate impairment. Secondly, if a segment is in Category 5 or Category 3B or Category 4, it only moves if new data, water quality data, biological data, indicate that that segment is fully supported. If no data are ever available, that segment will stay impaired forever. On the flip side, if we have water quality data or biological data, that indicate full support of a use, those data age out after 10 years. So full support segments go away, not supported segments stay on forever. So if we look at the fish kills, these are the causes of the 81 during this cycle: animal waste, unknown toxicity, pesticides, fertilizer spill, ammonia. And I'll just expand a little bit on unknown toxicity. What happens there, if there's a significant lag between the public reporting the kill to when our field offices and fishery staff investigate the kill, that sometimes you can't determine the cause. However, if it's suspected that it was human cause or anthropogenic or animal waste, it will still be impaired. Let's move over to the next. It's the green and gold or green and tan graph. What this is the total number of impairments. It's category 4 plus category 5 from 1998 to 2022. Every 2 years. The red line indicates the percent change between the cycles. So as you can see, overall, there's been an increase. However, I haven't done the statistical analysis, but from 2014 to 2022, there seems to be a leveling off. And if we look specifically at the last few cycles, from 2016 to 2018, there was a 2% increase, 18 to 20, a 2% decrease, and then from 2020 to 2022, there was no change. There was actually a change in one water body, but based on rounding, the change was 0%. For this cycle, we went from 585 in 2020 to 594 in category 5 in 2022. In category 4, we went from 167 to 157. And I'll just remind you that for a category 4 segment means that most likely it was covered by a TMDL. However, to get removed, new data have to show full support. So if we look at the reasons for the delistings of the 48 impairments that are proposed for delisting for the 2022 cycle, new water quality data account for 30 of them. TMDL for 6. Again, new data. This is biological data, and then also fish kill data. So as you can see, the majority of the delistings were caused by the existence of new water quality data or biological data that indicated that there was some improvement or indicated that the segment was fully supported. And if of those 37 delistings total, over here shows what causes improved or what the impairment was that showed full support based on the new data, led by algal growth in our lakes, bacteria, and then down here you'll see some biological sampling improvement. As I mentioned previously, we are trying to be as transparent as possible. Our database developer came up with another way to summarize the data. These are called tree maps. And so these main four large boxes are our 4 designated uses in Iowa. This is Class A. This is the recreation, which combines A1, A2, and A3. This is Class B, which combines WW1, WW2, WW3, and LW. And then here's our Class C, or drinking water, and our Class HH, or fish consumption use. So this is all of the uses. So if we hover over rivers, of the 24, 29 assigned uses, rivers have, of the Class A uses, assigned 2199. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the not assessed uses are 14 of those 2199. Not supported are 411 of the 2199. Fully supported, a small number, 38. And then Winofi, potentially impaired, is even a smaller number. And then the bigger boxes are broke into the rivers and lakes and wetlands. Similar thing over here, the not supported numbers, not assessed, fully supported, and Winofi. And it goes that way for all of the designated uses. This is Class B, real quickly. Here's rivers. I can't read the numbers, but as you can see by the boxes, not only does the size indicates the number the proportion, if you will, of the total. So as you can see, the bigger the box, the bigger proportion. So in the rivers, let me get off that not assessed box is large compared to the rest of the boxes, and then it just goes down. Another way to look at the data. Just to summarize real quickly, just remember that segments will have multiple uses, and uses can have multiple impairments, and that's why you see the number climb as you move from segments to impairments. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lori.
Thanks, Dan and Ken. As I mentioned earlier, the Clean Water Act lays out a path for us to follow to improve the quality of our waters. We used this Impaired Waters List to create water quality improvement plans for impaired segments. Improvement can then be accomplished through point source upgrades or non-point source projects. One of our success stories is from Farmers Creek, a tributary to the Maquoketa River in Jackson County. Farmers Creek was added to the Impaired Waters List in the early 2000s after 2 significant fish kills and a notable decline in the health of the aquatic life in the creek. Water sampling found that excess nutrients and sediment washed in from the watershed, and monitoring also found low numbers of fish, insects, snails, mussels, crayfish, and other wildlife in the creek. This indicated a biological impairment of the stream. To address these concerns, the Jackson County Soil and Water Conservation District launched a watershed improvement project in 2005. They worked with farmers and landowners to make changes on the land to improve the water quality. This 5-year project helped place conservation practices on the land, like stream bank protection, grassed waterways, sediment basins, and more. This reduced sediment reaching the stream by 40%. Since the end of the project, local farmers and landowners have upheld the culture of conservation by maintaining these practices and adding new ones. The reduction in sediment also improved the habitat in Farmers Creek with fish and other aquatic life. Sampling has noted a greater diversity of fish and invertebrate species, as well as increases in species that are sensitive to pollution and habitat disturbances. Based on these improvements, Farmers Creek is now a candidate for removal from the state's Impaired Waters List. There were many partners that took part in the success story of Farmers Creek, including the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, our 319 program, the Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the Iowa Resource Enhancement Assistance Program. So to wrap up, we encourage the public to review our data, assessments, and our methodology on our ADB website, and we will accept public comments through March 19th, 2022. The email address again for public comments is ircomments@dnr.iowa.gov. Thank you.